Hey everybody, so today we talked about the bubonic plague. So what I decided to do was to go through each question and kind of give you the answer and a little bit of background, because after we play our game, I know we're not really going to have a lot of time to kind of go over the questions. So this is a way for you to check, or if you are absent, this is what you are going to need to know for our quiz on Chapter 5. Okay, so we're going to start out with question 1. So when did the bubonic plague first strike Europe? Did it return, and when? So it does return. In your book on page 56, there is a spread of the plague. So it first struck Europe from about 1347 to 1351. Then it returned about every 10 years or so. So the map that is on your screen kind of shows how it kind of spreads. It starts in the east. It starts in Asia. It starts in China, we think. And it kind of spreads over, and it takes over a lot. It returns a lot. So like I said, like every 10 years or so. Historians, where do they think the plague started and how do they think it spread? So they think that it began in Central Asia and spread throughout China, India, the Near East, and Europe. So they think the bacteria that caused this disease, it kind of started in Central Asia, and it went to the Black Sea along the Silk Road, which you guys learned about in 6th grade last year. And it was probably carried to Italy on a ship. So these bacteria started to kind of form and carried this awful, terrible disease. So the symptoms. Oh, it's the gross part. Sorry. So here are your symptoms. You have fever, vomiting, fierce coughing, sneezing fits constantly, and these egg-sized swelling or bumps. So if you guys look at the picture that's on the bottom of your screen, you're going to see these two guys kind of laying there with all those bumps. These bumps were gross. They called them tumors. Basically, once those things appeared, you were kind of done for. They were black and blue blotches on the skin of everybody. It's not really that great. So when we talked about Chapter 4, we talked about some of the different cures that people did, right? Well, you know, the cures that they did really weren't treating the infection. So these people kind of they had these giant blotches, these egg-shaped blotches everywhere. It was disgusting. Ugh. So the name Black Death probably came from those black and blue blotches. I can never say that. Black and blue blotches that appeared on the skin. So once you kind of had the Black Death, you kind of had it for pretty much until you died. You know, there were people who did survive, but for the most part, you wouldn't survive. It was disgusting, right? Because we know medieval towns were gross. So the plague spread because the bacteria would attach themselves to fleas. So fleas would have it. The fleas would the fleas would feed on the blood of the infected, like rats. So then those fleas, once the rats died, they would jump onto other animals and people. Remember, towns are gross. People bathe like what? Once every couple months? Maybe, if they're lucky. People just threw all of the stuff out onto the streets. It was gross. People didn't understand to clean themselves. So these fleas would just kind of attach themselves to a rat. The rat would be able to go around. And like I said before, I know I said earlier, but cats. People thought that cats were from the devil. So they would get rid of the cats, and the cats would not eat the rats, thereby basically like bringing it along. The rats would kind of go into homes. It was very common to see rats constantly. These towns are disgusting. So the fleas would jump onto other animals and people, bite them, spread the bacteria. Dun dun dun. So people blamed the plague on literally everything they could. So maybe it was the position of the planet then. Or it was the lepers. Remember we talked about leprosy a little bit ago with a disease. So people blamed it on them. Or people blamed it on people who were different. So they blamed it on the Jews. Because remember, we talked about this before. The Jews have a different religion than Christianity, and Christianity rules every single thing at this time period. So they kind of were excluded, and they were thought to bring this curse. So England, France, Germany, and some other places, they actually ordered all the Jews to leave because they said, you are causing this disease. It is your fault. It didn't really help. It actually kind of made other people more prejudiced, right? Because they're kicking these people out, and then, oh, well, the plague's not around, I guess you can come back in, but 9 times out of 10, the plague's going to come back because people are gross. And they blamed these people again. So these people were forced out of their homes constantly. So they thought, you're different, you carry the disease, get out. Not a very good time to live in. People were scared. They blamed the first thing they could think of, which was blame someone different than themselves. So in China, which is where we think the Black Plague and the Black Death started, it was reduced to about half. So there are a lot of people between 1200 and 1393. There's this plague that happens, and it's reduced in half. It's not really great. I mean, travelers would say that these dead bodies covered the ground. So we can all imagine how well that smelled. But people were dying so quickly that they couldn't even grow food for themselves. So not only are people dying from the plague, they're starting to die from famine. They're not able to feed themselves and their families anymore. So according to some historians, we estimate, this is again an estimation, about 24 million people died as a result, about 1/3 of the population at that time. Now remember, the plague starts in about 1347 to 1351, and it returns every 10 years or so, up until almost the 1600s. So there's constantly people dying. But the big time is this 1347 to 1351. The picture that you'll see on the bottom of the screen, it's a mass grave. So literally, I'm sure you guys have heard the bring out your dead. Well, that comes from this time period, because that bring out your dead was literally, all right, whatever dead bodies you have, get them on this cart. We need to go bury them. 24 million people. And, they were put in these mass graves. They weren't even marked. We don't know who these people were. We have no names, because it's literally, you just throw the dead body in, hope that you don't get sick from it. So obviously, trade and commerce slowed to a halt, right? People were petrified. They didn't want people coming in and out of their city. Maybe they have the plague. Maybe they have the death. So when it does that, the economy starts to need to be rebuilt. And as it starts to need to be rebuilt, feudal lords lose a lot of their power. So here are your 2 reasons from a shift from power of nobles to the common people. First, the need for workers. The workers who were still there, who could still, build things, the ones who could still farm and stuff, they're all that's left. If you don't have a lot of people, you can start demanding more money. Oh, yeah, I'll do that job for you, but there's not anybody else who's going to do it, so why don't you give me some more money? Or, you can't treat me that way, because if you treat me that way, then I'm not going to work for you, so you need to treat me better. So this need for workers caused the workers who are left to demand more things. So people had to start taking more money from the feudal lords. And a lot of serfs actually started to leave the feudal manors. I know we talked about in medieval towns that if they were gone for a year and a day, then they were free. Well, when your lord and lady are dying from the plague, it's pretty easy to escape. So many of them just kind of disappeared, and they started moving to towns and cities. So there's not that manor system anymore. There's no feudalism anymore, because the people who were in feudalism left. So the feudal lords started to get more and more and more power, or less and less and less and less power. The serfs got more and more and more and more power. So people start to kind of even out. There's no more feudalism, there's no more kings, lords, knights, serfs. It's kind of a king, nobles, commoners people. So people started to get very angry, especially the peasants. The feudalism kind of started to die out. Well, the nobles still wanted to do it, right? They still want their stuff. They still want to be in charge. So the peasants don't like that. So they start to have these rebellions. So they happen all over Europe. Specifically from your textbook, it says France, Flanders, England, Germany, Spain, and Italy. And they broke out because people were mad. They didn't want to return back to feudalism. The people who escaped from towns, or escaped to towns, they're not going to want to go back to living on a manor. They want to do what they want to do. They want to be free. They tasted that freedom. So peasant rebellions start to break out and people start to get mad. And the most famous result is this English Peasants' War in 1381, so 30 years after this big, big outbreak of the plague. So the rebels marched into London and they presented their demands to Richard II. The revolt kind of lost momentum because the leader of the rebellion was killed, but most people still had those ideas. So when the lords start saying, hey, you gotta move back to the manor, the peasants and serfs are like, no, we don't have to. We're free now. We don't have to do what you say. So combine that with these political reforms where people are getting more power and more say in what they're doing, people are not going back to this feudal system at all. So feudalism declines because yesterday we talked about the political developments, right? So the Magna Carta, Henry II's legal reforms, the model parliament, those things gave power to the king and to the common people. But with the Black Death, so many people died. But as a result of that, people started to get more and more and more power and more rights. All right, so thanks for checking in with this, guys. I really hope that this helps you with your notes, as well as maybe taught you something a little bit new. So I will see you guys tomorrow in class. Okay, bye.